All right, let's begin. In this briefing, we're breaking down the critical opening phase of the Guipúzcoa Campaign. All of our intel comes straight from the meticulous work of Colonel F.J. Victor Rodrigo, and it shows the conflict that was defined by one key factor right from the start. So here's the bottom line, right up front. The entire campaign really hinges on this one central dynamic. You've got a coalition that's plagued by internal divisions and just a chaotic command structure. And on the other side, a force that's smaller, sure, but it's unified and operates with professional military discipline from day one. This imbalance, this asymmetry, is what's going to shape every single move and outcome in the opening stages. To really get a grip on the Republican Basque position, we have to start with its most important and most conflicted part, the Basque Nationalist Party. Now, what's so fascinating here is the massive paradox at play. The PNV was conservative, deeply religious, and wanted independence. Their allies in the Popular Front, well, they were revolutionary, proletarian, and secular. So you can see, this was never an alliance of shared beliefs. It was purely an alliance of convenience. And this is where you see their completely different goals laid bare. The PNV leadership made a very pragmatic choice. They figured siding with the Republic was the quickest way to get their statute of autonomy. But that decision meant they had to team up with forces whose entire worldview was the opposite of their own. And this led to a very hesitant initial stance, basically a kind of passivity while they waited for the political deal to come through. This messy political landscape spilled right over into the operational environment. You see, control of the region wasn't uniform at all. It was this complex patchwork of competing groups. Take a look at this map. It's based on the election results from February 1936, and it gives us a fantastic visual intelligence summary. It shows you exactly where the different political loyalties were strongest, which, as you can imagine, would have a direct impact on military mobilization and command unity in those critical first days of the war. So the political breakdown was pretty clear. The PNV held a majority in the wider provinces, but the socialists controlled the crucial industrial hub around Bilbao. And at the same time, you had communists and anarcho-syndicalists who were a powerful and often violent force in key spots like passages. The main takeaway here, there was no single unified political authority that could actually direct a cohesive war effort. Now, all this political fragmentation had a direct and frankly disastrous effect on military organization. Let's take a closer look at the actual structure of the Republican and Basque forces on the ground. So the first response to the uprising was to form these decentralized defense juntas. You had separate juntas pop up in Guipúzcoa, Eibar, Azpeitia, and Vizcaya. And each one acted like its own independent political and military power in its own little zone. This created the very first layer of what would become organizational chaos. And you see this political division mirrored perfectly in the military command structure. Instead of one unified command, you get these parallel, uncoordinated military headquarters. The Guipúzcoa junta had its own commander, first Pérez de Garmendia, then San Juan. The Azpeitia junta, which was dominated by nationalists, had its own commander, Captain Sesepta. This total dispersion of command made any kind of cohesive, large-scale operation functionally impossible. And you don't have to take my word for it. Commander San Juan's own assessment gives us a stark piece of field intelligence. He basically says demagoguery and individual initiative were running rampant. He describes the communists and anarchists as the most dangerous elements, the Republicans as having no real influence, and the Basque nationalists as keeping to themselves. He's painting a picture not of an army, but of competing armed factions where politics and personal actions completely overrode any kind of unified military strategy. As for the forces themselves, well, it was a real mixed bag. You had some loyalist security forces, but the main fighting corps was made up of highly motivated but very undisciplined Marxist and anarcho-syndicalist militias. And here's the crucial part. The nationalist militias, the Gudaris, were largely passive during this specific campaign. Their actions were described as weak, if not null, because they were still waiting for their political goals to be met. Okay, let's switch gears and examine the opposing force structure. The contrast in organization and doctrine is, well, it's pretty striking. The core of the nationalist forces for this campaign came from volunteers in Navarre and Álava, and these were regions where conservative forces had won the 1936 elections. This gave them a politically unified and motivated base of manpower right from the get-go. And just to put a number on that, by the spring of 1936, so this is even before the uprising, there were already about 10,000 organized Carlist volunteers, or requetés, in Navarre and Álava alone. This wasn't some militia that was thrown together in response to events. This was a pre-existing, organized force ready for immediate action. So what made these volunteers so immediately effective? It really boils down to 4 key factors. First, they accepted military discipline right away. Second, they were slotted directly into existing army units or used to form new ones that followed military standards. Third, they were commanded by professional officers. And fourth, their new units were built on a standard military structure. This is in absolute stark contrast to the ad hoc, politically led militias on the Republican side. All right, let's pull all this analysis together into a direct comparison of the strategic situation. This table really summarizes the core of the issue. Look at command and control. It was fragmented versus unified. Unit cohesion, low and fractional versus high and disciplined. Leadership, political amateurs versus military professionals. And operational doctrine, completely improvised versus fully integrated. In every single critical measure of military effectiveness, the nationalist forces started this campaign with a decisive advantage. So, based on this incredibly stark analysis of the initial force structures and political realities, we're really left with one fundamental strategic question. Given this massive asymmetry, was the outcome in Guipúzcoa basically a foregone conclusion before the first shot was even fired? For a deeper tactical and operational study of this campaign and others, the source material at www.batallasguerracivil.es is the definitive resource. This concludes the briefing.